orchestral tempest unlike anything that had been heard at the time. And significantly, the opening chord is this. Played by the winds, brass, and timpani, it is a combination of the symphony's main key of D minor and its secondary key, B flat major. And not surprisingly, the ensuing madness is based entirely on the D minor triad, making it 4 out of 4 movements whose main material is built on the D minor triad. First movement. Second movement. The third movement. And now the finale. Unity, organic, symphonic unity. But such an explosive, terrifying sound. Wagner later referred to this as the Schreckens Fanfare, the Horror Fanfare, and it ends on a big unison A. The dominant of D minor, a perfect theatrical setup for something big. Beethoven writes what is essentially an operatic recitative for the celli and basses. He writes in the score, quote, in the character of a recitative, but in tempo. This is what we call an accompanied recitative, since the orchestra punctuates and supports the recitation. And this grand extended recitative in the celli and bass continues unaccompanied, no harmony around it. So we have to follow the outline of the theme as it moves into B flat major. And a pair of dramatic recitative chords from the orchestra lead to a most unusual sound. The oddest sensation, it's like you know what all over again, that we're hearing an echo of the very opening of the symphony, the cosmic void from which this entire journey evolved, the perfect fifth pulsating. But in the beginning, there was no third to form a triad. We didn't know if it was a major or minor tonality, but now there's a low C sharp. So it's a major, which might very well resolve to D major somewhere in the future. But the celli and bass resume. As if contemplating, pondering the events that we've experienced. And then, yes, that was the second movement, the scherzo, a fleeting vision recalled from our subconscious. And an abrupt descending forth, and the celli and bass resume. That's the main theme of the third movement. So we are reviewing the 3 previous movements. And Beethoven's sketches for this passage clearly show some sort of conflict over this recall. Not this, it is too gentle, he wrote in his sketches. We must seek something more animated. So as Beethoven is rewriting musical history here, there's a process. Beethoven is working his way through this musical labyrinth. And the celli and bass continue with very minimal harmony from 3 woodwinds, moving into the key of C sharp minor, and a decisive descending fourth. And you will hear the woodwinds now softly lead us into the key of A major, which becomes an A dominant 7th chord that outlines a new theme in the bright and most welcome key of D major, and now a restored, revitalized, invigorated recitative. And concluding decisively as before, the descending fourth and a cadence by the winds and brass that propels us directly into the main theme of the finale. The famous one in D major, built in regular 4-bar phrases like a folk song, a song of the people, but with great calm and confidence, still in octaves, still cello and bass, still entirely unaccompanied. And again, this finale is basically a theme and variations, so we will hear plenty of this wonderful melody. Its first 2 phrases parallel one another. The next 4 bars is what we might call the bridge. And the first phrase will return now as we move directly into the first variation. And there, the violas joined the cello with the main theme, under which the basses play this. So together we have this. And above, a solo bassoon mirrors the basses, like so. And in the final phrase of the tune, the basses playing this, they change this one note, so we get this, which adds a distinctive and lovely intensity to this phrase. Here it is. Harmony. Harmony makes the world go round. And this same figure now is heard in the second variation, in the inner voices of the string choir. The theme is now gently floating above in the first violins, the bassoon continuing below, and that lovely new harmonic progression returns, and the calm, the radiance of this second variation tells us that we have arrived. And that vigorous, brilliant sound, the third variation, a full orchestral march, clearly recalls Beethoven's rousing, heroic music from 2 decades earlier. And this third variation is the first to include a new feature, an extension to the theme, which is this, beginning in D major and moving to G major. And the sense of triumph is unmistakable, the excitement perhaps a bit too intense, maybe too frenetic. The strings, in particular, have unleashed a flurry of dashing 16th notes. In the first violins, and in the second violins and violas, as triumphant D major is destabilized. But the music manages to hold on, and it moves to A major, and the frenzy abruptly comes to a halt with a light, delicate melody in A major. Then in B minor, but then as if forecasting something really bad, it slips into totally unrelated E flat minor. Then it's smacked back into A major with renewed orchestral fury. A bizarre asymmetrical cadence, a roar of timpani, and we are totally disoriented. What happened to the great victory march? Why has Beethoven thrown the music into utter chaos? In which the victorious Ode to Joy was derailed, and that carefree little melody, very deceptive, popped in out of nowhere. Then it became somber. Then we went back to A major with a head fake cadence. 1, 2, 3, timpani, total upheaval. And now the return of the horror fanfare. This time it's even more horrible. The first time, you recall, it was a D minor and B flat major chord superimposed. But now, the total collapse of harmony. Beethoven's split-second forecast of the dissolution of tonal music 80 years later. This horror fanfare chord uses all the notes of the D minor scale together. Beethoven superimposes now the D minor triad with a C sharp diminished seventh chord, so we get this. It's right there on the page. It's insane. And this entire passage, the collapse of the Ode to Joy, it's so difficult to coordinate this in performance that I'm sure it was a total disaster, a total breakdown in its first performance. But maybe that's the way Beethoven wanted it. And this Schreckens fanfare, horror fanfare, as Wagner called it, it upset many younger and more sensitive listeners. It did. Critics, musicologists, even composers who called it a blot on the work. A famous composer later called it, quote, an infringement on the dignity of art, unquote. I think it's the coolest thing in the piece. And now, reeling from the shock of it all, we are prepared for the historic event, the entrance of the human voice, singing the same recitative that the cello and bass had played. O Freunde, O friends, nicht diesen Töne, not these sounds. No, not which sounds. Whatever the baritone means, his entrance is a truly historic event in symphonic music. The finale began with that first horror fanfare and the cello and bass recitative. Then the Ode to Joy theme appeared, and the first three variations in the orchestra followed before it all went off the tracks and the fanfare returned, totally berserk. Then the solo voice appears, calling, "O friends, not these sounds." And Beethoven, in this epic finale, a new concept, a new structure was needed to break through the conventions of symphonic form, the architecture of the past, even his past. It was no longer good enough for what he wanted to achieve. And now think of the opening of the Fourth Symphony, the first movement of the Seventh, the representation of the cosmic void, the interaction of energy and mass moving through time. And echoing Hindu philosophy, Beethoven wrote in his Tagebuch, For God, time absolutely does not exist. A mythical Hindu king visits heaven for a day, and he finds when he's returned to earth, centuries have passed. And the same concept is found in other cultures. But in art, in music, can our perception of time be altered in some way as we listen by the way in which the music is constructed? And I realize that I risk going too far with these concepts, but I'm only reacting to what is in the music itself, plus what we know about Beethoven's fascination with religion, philosophy, and science. Why wouldn't the greatest musical mind of all time, especially as he withdrew from society due to his deafness into his own private world where he was the creator, why would he not strive to reflect the most awesome mysteries of nature and life, time and space in his music? Why not? And so in this finale, up to this point, and here it comes, everything we've heard has been a preview, an orchestra-only vision of events which are now about to reoccur. Everything we've heard thus far, Horror Fanfare, the cello bass recitative, the Ode to Joy theme, triumphant variations, will now be repeated, reincarnated. What we've heard has been an outline, a pre-state of existence that Beethoven will now reanimate by transforming man-made instruments into God-given voices, using the same music. And 70 years later, Gustav Mahler would echo this creative dilemma, the crossroads at which Beethoven found himself in the ninth. Mahler wrote that, in planning a large musical structure, quote, I always come to the point where I have to resort to the word as a vehicle for my musical idea. And so Beethoven's music now moves from one dimension, instrumental, into another, vocal, using the same music. The one thing we do not hear repeated now are the brief recalls, the flashbacks of the first three movements, so they're gone. In any case, the baritone soloist now delivers a much more compact version of the recitative formerly played by celli and basses. And the beginning of both recitatives, the first one for cello and bass, and now the solo baritone, is this striking interval. That's the same perfect fifth. Out of which this entire symphony has evolved. O friends, not these sounds. And the recitative suddenly becomes more inward, more thoughtful. The baritone is giving voice to Beethoven's own thoughts, since he wrote these opening words. Not these sounds, but rather, let us have sounds more pleasing. And as we move to D major, punctuated by full recitative chords from the orchestra, sounds more pleasing and full of joy. And you recall how the woodwinds first introduced the big theme a while ago, like so. Well, it happens again. And as the woodwinds play this passage, one of the greatest thrills in the entire repertoire, the baritone proclaims Freude, joy, and the massed voices respond. That was the fourth variation, and what an astounding theatrical stroke by Beethoven. The baritone soloist, surrogate for the composer himself, calling out, and the shouts of joy that ring out in response. And just so we're clear, in German we have the word Freunde, which the baritone first sang, O Freunde, that's the word for friends, with an N. But Freude, which is the same word without the N, is the word for joy. However, back to the real world, here we go. No sooner had the hall emptied after the 1824 premiere of this symphony than the theoretical arguments about this finale kicked in, and they persist to this day, 200 years later. Did Beethoven violate the concept of absolute music by introducing voices into this finale? Did he abandon the purity of instrumental music, its cerebral, abstract essence, by resorting to the obvious trappings of the theater and opera? Well, as a couple of musicians have pointed out, the audiences at the time weren't offended, and that's who Beethoven was writing for. Orchestra concerts were often potpourris with vocal and choral elements combined with orchestral music. Think of Beethoven's Monster Concert in December of 1808, which we discussed along with the Fifth Symphony. Viennese audiences took it in stride. So back to the finale. The fourth variation you just heard presents the Ode to Joy theme sung by the baritone, and then the second half of the theme is repeated by the chorus in octaves, giving the impression of people's voices massed together. And Schiller's text is, Joy, beautiful spark of the gods, daughter of Elysium, Tochter aus Elysium. More on that in just a bit. Then the second half of the theme, Deine Zauber binden wieder, your magic binds again, was die Mode streng geteilt, that which strict custom has divided. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, all men become brothers. Not all men are brothers. This is a process through which we become brothers and sisters and children and whatnot. And variation 4 ends with an extension, the same one we heard previously. And so this variation has a very straightforward structure, and the 5th and 6th variations now will use the same pattern. And 4, 5, and 6 function as a group and are parallel to variations 1, 2, and 3, the former pre-existing orchestral version of this same music, now transformed into its elevated vocal state. And each of these new variations is elaborated by obbligato figuration in the woodwinds, which seems to suggest the delightful sounds of nature in our mythical destination. In variation 5, the solo vocal quartet is first heard, with the alto and tenor singing the theme in thirds, and Beethoven's fascination with Baroque-style counterpoint is obvious in the baritone's line. And when the second half of the tune repeats, the chorus takes over. The sopranos are now in the high octave. And the basic text of this variation, number 5, is this. Whoever has the great good fortune to enjoy mutual friendship, whoever has taken a loving wife, let him join us in celebration. And then the second half, Ja, wer auch nur eine Seele. Yes, even he who has nothing but a soul. But he who cannot rejoice, let him leave this band weeping. So here's the second half now of this 5th variation, with elaborate orchestral figuration enveloping the voices. And we hear the orchestral extension once again. And variation 6 is now more elaborate, as Beethoven eliminates the actual theme, but he retains its harmonic and phrase structure. And the solo quartet now takes over with a new melody. It's very florid, almost in the style of the then popular Italian opera. And the solo tenor and baritone sing in the interval of sixth. So this is a new melody, superimposed over the harmonic framework of the familiar theme. There's a rustic French horn honking away down on a low D, decorative trills in the strings, and when the second half of the tune repeats, the chorus enters, and they are required to execute the same level of elaborate passage work as the soloists did. Schiller's text is Freude trinken alle Wesen an die Brüsten der Natur. All creatures drink the joy from the breast of nature. Alle Guten, alle Bösen folgen ihren Rosenspur. All good and all evil follow in her rosy path. And the flowery imagery of this text is mirrored in the vocal writing. Here is variation number 6. We are told that at the premiere performance, many of the sopranos in the chorus, like some of the players, sat out the very difficult passages which are written in a tortuously high register. And the text of Variation 6 ended with the words, "Even to a worm ecstasy is granted, and the cherubs stand before God." Obviously, creation from bottom to top is included in Schiller's plan. And we hear the familiar extension again. But the chorus continues to repeat the words, "and the cherubs steht vor Gott," stand before God, moving now into A major. Steht vor Gott, with rushing, cascading scales from the strings as the chorus repeats the words, "before God." Clearly, we have ascended from the chaos of the introduction and are now poised at the throne of God, a vision of heaven, especially awe-inspiring when the massive unison A of the entire orchestra and chorus becomes the third of F major. A stunning moment. And a pause, the voices echoing into the cosmic silence. Well, that F major chord could become a seventh chord, like so, that might lead to B flat major. It could. And out of the silence that follows the ecstatic cry, "For Gott," we hear this. And I'll tell you right now, this is another controversial spot in Beethoven's mighty magnum opus. And Schiller's odd reference to both the worm and the angels, the lowly and the sublime, in the same verse, seems to have inspired Beethoven here. Friedrich Schiller's On die Freude, Ode to Joy, we call it, it's literally on or about joy, dates from 1785, the height of the Enlightenment, and Beethoven had admired the poem since his youth and had intended on 2 or 3 occasions to set it to music prior to the Ninth Symphony. But the world was changing rapidly during this time, and some authors feel that the idealistic concept of Freude, joy, after the Congress of Vienna and the subsequent repression, was now being interpreted as freedom, Freude, freedom, which was Schiller's original intention. "Through beauty," he wrote, "we achieve freedom." And his original version of the poem had anti-tyrannical lines in it, which were then removed for this latest version. But in any case, the Viennese tended to take refuge from life's problems in their taverns and coffee houses, as seems to be the case now with the down-to-earth humor in the 7th variation. As you heard, it's a military march of the popular Turkish variety. Beethoven adds a piccolo and a contrabassoon to the woodwinds, the latter of which, along with the bass drum, provides those amazing low grunts from which the march arises. And there's also cymbals and triangle added, another novelty in a formal symphony. Well, no, wait a minute. Haydn used the same percussion in his great military symphony in 1794. Why am I still talking about Haydn? And now, Beethoven begins to actually transform the Ode to Joy theme and not just dress it up with the orchestra. So here in straight duple meter, 2, 1, 2, becomes this in B flat major, quick triple time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the tenor soloist's big moment now, froh, with happiness, just as his sons fly through the heavens' mighty paths. Laufet, Brüder, run, brothers, joyfully, like a hero off to victory. Very lofty words for such a quaint little march. And back in the second variation, the phrase where the harmonies produce that serene, ethereal beauty. This. In the same phrase now, in our country march, Beethoven writes this. And the tenor's drinking buddies all join in for a rousing chorus. Laufet, Brüder, run, brothers, like a hero to victory. I want to read to you the words of the great 20th century English composer Ralph Vaughan Williams about this variation. Quote, Beethoven was a truly religious man and was therefore not ashamed to place earthly jollity side by side with deep adoration. Vaughan Williams then surmises that the tenor soloist in this march is probably a drunken soldier, likely a Welshman, and that the text suggests that, quote, the stars in the sky were jolly good fellows, fond of a glass of beer and a kiss from the barmaid, unquote. And since we are dealing now with the combination of the earthbound and the lofty, we've had our earthbound, so now it's time for a major fugal variation, number 8, played by the orchestra alone. And this fugue has a function in the structure of the finale. It comes at the midpoint, more or less, and it immediately pulls us out of the jolly revelry of the march and sets us back onto the path of Beethoven's quest for higher spiritual ground. And it's a double fugue with two subjects running parallel to one another. One of the subjects is a rapid triple meter variant of the Ode to Joy theme itself, which in the fugue is now transformed into this. And you will hear that exciting motor rhythm running through most of this variation. And along with it, the second subject is this, 1, 1, which you will always recognize by its distinctive rhythm. A true symphonic extension of the march rhythm. So here, the end of the march, moving directly into variation 8, the double fugue for orchestra. And ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered some typical fugal turbulence with this diminished chord as the drama intensifies. And as always in fugal writing, the textures are busy and complex. This is why Rousseau hated this barbarism, as he foolishly called it. And the fact that the two motifs, the ode theme and the march rhythm, are continually playing means that we have to follow this music largely by how and when the harmonies change. So we've just hit this. Yeah, I hit it. There. Which leads to B flat minor and typical Baroque-like sequences in the march motive. Ba-bum. Leading to G flat major, and the ode, the quick triple time ode, does this. It begins to shift just a bit, like so. Here. Into B minor. And gradually Beethoven begins to circle back, drawing closer to the main key of D major. And the high point arrives as the entire orchestra is fused into the march motive. Ba-ba, ba-ba, with everyone now in octaves on the note F sharp. So this F sharp, hammered out by the full orchestra, now dies away in the French horns with the march rhythm. Ba-ba, ba-ba. It's just hanging there, leaving us in suspense. And F sharp becomes the fifth of B major. There's the first notes of the ode. And F sharp is also the fifth of B minor, which happens to be a very close relative of D major. There is variation number 9, a triumphant march for full orchestra and chorus, sweeping away the darkness and turbulence of the fugue, but maintaining its dashing eighth note version of the theme. Played by the entire string section in octaves. And as usual, we hear the orchestral extension, which now moves into G major. But it stops, leaving us in the key of G major, and we now ascend to the next level of Beethoven's spiritual quest. And Beethoven has rearranged the order of Schiller's verses so that we progress from earthly to a depiction of the heavens. The music now must evoke a vast cathedral-like space. And recalling Beethoven's plan to write a symphony based on ancient modes, we now encounter a majestic chant, an invocation, and it's entirely in unison, monody as it was known in early church music, without any harmony. Here it's the men's chorus, the low strings, and the third trombone. And this is the 10th variation on the Ode to Joy theme, where we see a more complex variation technique. As we've seen him do so often, Beethoven extracts a piece of the theme. This. Here. He just uses this fragment, bum, 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 these three notes, G, F sharp, D, and he repeats this three-note cell like so. And again, and again. And this majestic chant reflects the cosmic grandeur of Schiller's vision. The text, Seid umschlungen Millionen, be embraced ye millions, diesen Kuss der ganze Welt, this kiss for the whole world. And the chant is now repeated, but the austere unison now blossoms into a gorgeous four-part chorale by the full chorus. and a dissonance here worthy of Bach. And Beethoven's use of the orchestra is really striking here, with winds and trombones adding sonority to the chorus, while the strings envelop the chorus with flowing waves of sound. The cello and bass rise from below, rising three-note pattern, which of course is developed from, while above the violins play soaring, as if striving and reaching upward. A glorious sound. And the way that the strings surround the chorus is so cool. You almost experience the sensation of ascending and streaming light all around. And I'm not making this up. In his sketches, Beethoven wrote, quote, "The height of the stars can be pictured more by way of the instruments." He knew that the orchestra could create the effect that he wanted. And you recall from the Seventh Symphony, Beethoven's fascination with life on other planets, the effect of the sun's warmth in the universe, and in his Tagebuch, he briefly mentions Troglodytes, cave dwellers. And in this passage we just heard, the feeling of all humanity striving, yearning, reaching towards the light. It is so moving. And again, you look at the score, and you can see Beethoven's own struggle to convey these concepts using standard notation. Beethoven is transporting us through each variation into a higher, more perfect spiritual realm. And Beethoven wasn't Mozart, where everything fell perfectly into place in his music. Beethoven labored, he struggled. You see it in his sketches. And sometimes this decorative figuration in strings and woodwinds seems a bit clumsy, a little awkward. It's not as perfect as Mozart. But that's Beethoven. His monolithic power is always present, even when he's writing gentle, serene music. And the music now ascends to an even higher realm. And the text, "Brothers, above the vault of stars, there must," and the chorus repeats the word must. Above the vault of stars, there must dwell a loving Father. And now, solemnity, the 11th variation. And again, there's an archaic modal sound to the harmonies of G minor combined with C major, and the warmth of flutes, clarinets, and divided violas. And the chorus sings, "Do you fall to your knees, ye millions?" in hushed, reverent tones. But structurally, as a variation of the Ode to Joy theme, this one always stumped me. How does this chorale melody relate to? Well, Beethoven is working in mysterious ways here. Way back in the Serene Variations 1 and 2, I pointed out that lovely counter melody to the main theme, this. And this has now become this in our solemn liturgy in Variation 11. There it is. And the tranquility of the second variation is obviously connected in some way with the reverence and warmth of this variation, number 11. Do you fall to your knees, ye millions? Do you not sense your Creator? As the music builds with the text, seek him beyond the stars. And now we hear majestic columns of E-flat major chords with the words, above the stars, he must dwell. And what follows may be the most miraculous passage in this entire symphony. The resounding E-flat major still echoing into the cosmos, but the echo in the strings is this. A diminished seventh chord, and like stars emerging one by one, the oboes and the flutes. Remember, Beethoven said that stars can be pictured by the instruments. They extend the chord upward. And this diminished seventh chord is now anchored, connected to the fundamental tone, the resonance of the universe. Here. Now we perceive this as a dominant chord, a seventh chord that must resolve. And we are suspended. The chorus repeats the words, murmuring, above the stars, he must dwell. And you sense this shimmering, pulsating light of the limitless expanse. We're awaiting a sign, an answer. Of space expanded and of endless time, as Beethoven had quoted in his diary. There's nothing else that this passage could represent. It's there. You hear it in the music and the poetry. And as we now leave these two variations, numbers 10 and 11, we see how they function within Beethoven's grand structural plan for the finale. In composing his recent Missa Solemnis, Beethoven made a thorough study of liturgical music. Go through all of the ecclesiastical chants of the monks, he wrote in his Tagebuch. Clearly, this influence is central to the ceremonial grandeur of these two variations, which also are written in a slow, stately triple meter, that is, with 3 beats to the measure. And Beethoven knew that in sacred music, going back to the Middle Ages, the number 3, as conductor Erich Leinsdorf wrote, quote, was considered the perfect entity, representing the unity of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And thus the ancient liturgical modes define this structural panel, variations 10 and 11. And in his sketches, again, when the baritone says, "Oh friends, not these sounds," Beethoven writes this, quote, "No, this reminds us of our despair. Today is a day of celebration. Let it be celebrated with song and dance." So let's consider these final 3 variations we're about to hear as a trio of elaborate choral dances, each increasingly vigorous and animated. The first dance is our 12th variation, and it's another double fugue, another masterful confluence of joyful voices. And the 2 subjects of the fugue are these. First, a new triple meter version of the ode theme, and thus begins the choral soprano's greatest vocal trial. And along with this, the second subject of the fugue is the majestic chant that was intoned by the men's chorus in variation 10. But now in a spirited new version. So with both subjects together, we have and along with these 2 subjects, you will hear the dashing, jet-propelled first violins, embellishing the soprano's vocal line. So let's back up now as we're suspended in the shimmering starlight, awaiting a sign from the heavens. And you heard the standard fugal formula there. First statement is in the tonic key of D major. The second statement in the dominant key of A major. A joyous round dance, die ganze Welt, the whole world, as proclaimed by sopranos and tenors on a high A. A new variant, mysterious and all unison, with only clarinets and bassoons providing the pulse. And back in the solemn variation 11, as the chorus pondered that we seek the Creator beyond the stars, the melody was this. This rising chromatic line, well, here it is, suddenly very shadowy, as it's recalled in the middle of this festive dance. And again, and again. And as it builds, seek him beyond the stars. And at its high point in A major, warm and vibrant, the word Brüder, brothers. And we are reassured that above the stars he must dwell. And the music now shifts downward into G major. And the woodwinds ascend again, drawing us upward with the Ode to Joy motive. Again. Until they disappear into the celestial blue. Here is the entire passage, as the question of the Creator's existence is answered by Brüder. And now, before the final two dance variations, here's a brief sidebar on Schiller's text and its place in Beethoven's world. I think this is important for context. Friedrich Schiller was a poet and philosopher, and he wrote a major essay where he delineated the two major types of pastoral poetry, the naive and the sentimental. They sound the same, but they're not. The sentimental poet was the more mature, practical poet, which included Schiller himself. You recall in our episode on Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral, the 18th century Arcadian concept, the lost world of innocence, of pastoral beauty, a state of naivety and bliss, and the return to nature of Rousseau. And the naive poet's goal was a return for modern civilization to regress back to this inactive, passive state. And if you think of the Eloi, the future human race as envisioned by H.G. Wells in The Time Machine, that's the danger of an Arcadian existence. By contrast, the sentimental poet presented a more real-world aesthetic. Arcadia was an amoral semi-existence, but striving to achieve greater harmony between modern man and his environment. Now that was a much more honorable goal and much more consistent with the struggle of the Romantic Age. And that path leads forward to Elysium, also a mythical concept, but one far more connected with the realities of the human condition and its struggles. You had to earn your entrance into Elysium, the fabled Elysian fields, which in the legend of Orpheus were practically next door to Hades, the underworld, and which Schiller references often in his Ode to Joy, Tochter aus Elysium, daughter from Elysium. And this ideological struggle to attain a state of harmonious peace between the human race, nature, and the Creator, that's what appealed to Beethoven through Schiller's text and is so dramatically laid out in the progression of the Ninth Symphony from its very first sound through its final glorious moments. So back to the music, which has peacefully ascended and come to rest in G major. And now the second of our choral dances, variation number 13, begins as a delicate, airy scherzando in the upper strings, and it features the vocal quartet, and it's based on a fleeting variant of the ode theme. And there's a sunny pastoral quality for the moment. And the rhythmic outline of the theme is present in this. And through repetitions of this passage, the music intensifies and erupts into a major choral proclamation. Alle Menschen, all men, very rousing and built on descending thirds. Alle Menschen, all the more unexpected, then, when the music pulls back and the celebration suddenly becomes lyrical, intensely lyrical, as if to reflect on the immense human and spiritual aspects of our journey. And the sprightly pastoral music resumes. And as we approach the end, I want to point out two important elements in this music, which are both signaled by that lovely passage we just heard. Number one, I would be remiss if I did not mention again the harmonic axis of Beethoven's universe, the fundamental power and logic of the tonic and the dominant harmonies. And this chord, it's a dominant chord on A with the note G on top, and that would be the soprano's usual note, of course, the seventh of the chord. This chord will become increasingly important. And in the exquisite passage we just heard, where the robust alle Menschen suddenly changed to alle Menschen, there's that chord calling and reminding us of the spiritual beauty of this celebration. Here is the passage again. And the second thing, this brief meditation, this little oasis of calm that we've just heard, will occur 2 more times. And these episodes are a crucial part of Beethoven's structural and dramatic design from here to the end. And no sooner have the festivities resumed, complete with a full restatement of alle Menschen, than we hear the next of these lyrical passages as the solo vocal quartet now takes up the call of alle Menschen in E minor, but changing to E major, alle Menschen. attention. And again, the music pulls back and relaxes. And the solo quartet repeats the lovely meditation that we just heard. This is a new version of it. Now moving into the warm, radiant key of B major. This is essentially an extended cadenza for the four soloists, almost a tip of the hat on Beethoven's part to the Rossini craze in Vienna, but in a much more dignified manner. And the alto and tenor soloists rise in sixths. The tenor then emerges with an expressive melisma of his own. And you will hear the baritone starting on a low F sharp, rising almost 2 octaves. And finally, the soprano, peacefully ascending up to a high B. And notice that all of these solo lines are rising as we continue our ascent into the realm of Freude, of joy. All men become brothers where your gentle wings alight, they sing. No showy vocalism here, only pure, harmonious, rapturous beauty. And as you heard, B major gently shifts to B minor, and the bass gently descends from B to A. And we sense an imminent return to D major. And these two pitches that accomplish the move from B minor to D major, bum, bum, or there they are, and perhaps there is a bit of Rossini here as the final variation begins delicately. But suddenly it ignites and we're off. One is tempted to use the term Dionysian here, the Greek god of wine, revelry, and wild times. And who would have thought that the solemn chant from variation number 10 would now be living it up as swept along by the raucous energy unleashed by the full orchestra and chorus. Sopranos airborne on a high A, shouts of Brüder, the shrill piccolo, the clanging percussion, all of this set to the text of the solemn variation number 10. Seid umschlungen, be embraced, ye millions, this kiss for all the world. What a difference a few variations can make. And what was initially solemn now explodes with riotous, frenetic energy. But there is a sort of solemnity here as the chorus locks in with these chords that have something of a liturgical progression. But the intensity of the music is off the chart with this dashing figure. In the high woodwinds and violins, it's derived, of course, from the ode theme. And that ever-present A seventh chord. There it is. And twice, as the sopranos hold their high G, the rest of the chorus hurtles downward on the A seventh chord. I thought instruments are supposed to dash off that sort of figure, not the human voice. And a new choral figure at the last moment, entirely based on the pitches of A and D. All octaves ringing out over the orchestral frenzy on the words Schöne Götter Funken, divine spark of the gods. So as he storms the heaven, Beethoven again resorts. He regresses, you might say, to the bare, tonic, dominant axis of harmony. We are coming full circle. And now, one last time, the music hesitates. It seems to hover again on that pivotal A seventh chord with the sopranos on the high G, daughter of Elysium, and a final majestic chorale. Joy, beautiful spark of the gods, with the entire string section in torrents of glorious descending scales. And I'd never stop the music here if there wasn't something very important, and we'll hear it all again in a minute. As you know, the orchestral coda to this work is thrilling. There's nothing like it in the repertoire for raw, electrifying power. And the man who wrote it was in ill health, deaf and dispirited. But the romantic concept of Freude, joy through struggle, in this case artistic, creative struggle, kept Beethoven going. And in this coda, the ode theme finally now reappears in a recognizable form, in a blaze of glory in the winds and brass. While the violins and violas, and this is impossible to hear in the orchestra, they are playing the ode theme twice as fast against the winds and brass. And they keep rising until D major is all that remains. Everything else is superfluous. And once we arrive at pure D major, the massed winds, piccolo, trombones, timpani, percussion, and the strings furiously sweeping across their open D and A strings. And at the last second, everybody drops back to reveal the woodwinds for the final time, ascending, rushing, rocketing upward into the stratosphere. And how astounding. The last two measures, the interval of the fifth, A and D. That's all that's there. The music has reverted to its primal origins, the perfect fifth from which this entire symphony has evolved. And the final resounding note from the full orchestra was a D, unison and in octaves, not a D major chord. No, it's just D, the fundamental, as it had to be. One final controversial issue of which this symphony is full. That majestic choral statement near the end, joy, spark of the gods, this one. Okay, with the brilliant cascading strings all around it. As you've heard, it's very majestic, a slow, solemn, expansive final statement before the raucous coda. Beethoven's Ninth just wouldn't be the same without that stately, hymn-like passage. Okay, but that's not at all the way he wrote it. Beethoven's markings make it 100% clear that he wanted the tempo to keep driving ahead in this passage. He even set up very carefully a phrase structure leading into the big choral statement. But along with his specific metronome marking, there is no doubt about his intention. He wanted the music to keep charging ahead through that big choral statement, like a triumphal march. And even before we can catch our breath, we hurtle joyously back into the frenzy of the coda. What confuses the issue is Beethoven's written change of meter that he indicated in the score at this point, which reflects the liturgical practices of the Baroque and Renaissance, which is why he wrote it, where tempi are often based on mathematical relationships. The conductor Erich Leinsdorf, again, points this out in very convincing detail. The other thing that confuses the issue here is interpretation and tradition, as 19th century conductors decided that Beethoven couldn't possibly have intended the music to drive ahead at this dramatic juncture. But when you look at the score and you see Beethoven's audacious, awe-inspiring vision on the page, and then actually hear it as he conceived it, he was right, definitely right. It takes some getting used to, but conductors, orchestras, and audiences will probably never undo these false traditions. But in any case, here is what Beethoven actually intended in this final choral passage. I think Beethoven was absolutely right. It is so overwhelming and exciting. Anyway, after the titanic struggle to create this masterwork and then organize and produce its premiere performance on May 7th, 1824, Beethoven was distraught to learn that the box office receipts didn't come close to covering his expenses, and according to reports, he collapsed in despair. He was human, and he was beset with challenges and hardship, especially at this point in his life. Hereafter, his major focus became his final string quartets, sublime works where Beethoven's ever-expanding vision and consciousness would be crystallized, concentrated, and distilled into this most ascetic and intimate form of musical expression. But in his 9 symphonies, we've witnessed Beethoven, who arrived a young man on the stage in Vienna at the dawn of the 19th century, journey through the heroic era of the 3rd and 5th symphonies, the cosmic mysteries of the 4th and 7th, and ultimately lead us to seek the Creator in the starry vault of heaven a quarter century later in the 9th. Beethoven was human, a very rare sort, but human nonetheless. And that's why his music is immortal. I'm Lawrence Rapchak, and more importantly, he's Ludwig van Beethoven.